Well, it's 8:03 and I think I'd like to get the meeting started and hope we can fill in as we go along. So I'll open the meeting at 8:03. Are there any adjustments to the agenda? Hearing none, are there any public comments?
Yes.
Go ahead, Kim.
I recommend John Moore be general manager for Green Mountain Transit. I have another question. Is the lobby reopened today due to the flood?
Any-
Clayton, do you know that? There's, you know what, Kim? I'm not quite sure.
Sorry,
But
I forgot that I was on mute. So
yeah.
it should be reopening today.
Thank you.
Thank you, Kim. Next item is an action item, the approval of the committee minutes for November 13th.
I'll move to approve.
Thank you, Chapin.
I'll second it.
Thank you, Susan. Any comments, corrections? All those in favor, please say aye.
All right.
Aye. Any opposed? Any abstentions? Motion carries and the minutes are approved. Nick,
Hey,
finance
we
report.
a lot of talking today, so I'm gonna try to take it easy. We have a lot to get through for the budget, so I'm gonna be very brief on my finance report. It's in there, and of course, if I don't cover anything, you can always reach out to me. Just a couple department updates. We recently got the audit back. It's draft form, obviously. My staff are reviewing it. We're preliminarily very happy with the results of it. We expect another year with, essentially no findings, maybe a management comment, but definitely no findings. And, that's really a testament to, my staff, especially Tammy, who's our controller. She does a really fantastic job with the financials. So I just want to recognize her for a second. But we will be bringing that in, January, February, I think. And look forward to having the auditor in and they can present and answer any questions from the committee. Now that's some good news, a little bit of bad news now. We got the workers' compensation audit done. We had another year with a very significant payment, much more than last year, actually. I whittled it down to, I think 50,000 last year from six figures, but this year it was over 100,000. And, I'll just take, responsibility for this. My understanding of how to provide the auditor with the wages has been incorrect for many years. I thought I had the correct risk categories for our employees, and for certain ones I didn't. And that's what led to the higher payment that's required. The good news is this will obviously correct itself in future insurance renewals. I'm going to likely try to send updated wages for the current renewal so we don't end up, in this situation at the end of FY26. But just, some examples of folks that I thought were lower risk that turned out to be higher risk. We have a property management employee. I thought, he mostly for the most part doesn't do the work himself. He sits, has his own office, things like that. So I assumed he would be in the lower risk. Well, no, he's definitely in the higher risk. And then there's just a number of other employees that you'd be very surprised about, that fall into the higher risk category, like our DTC employees who, sell tickets and things like that. So the good news is hopefully we won't have this problem in the future. But bad news is we're having to pay a much higher workers' comp bill than we originally thought. Some other good news, VTrans kindly provided a slew of additional funding this year. We got $200,000 more in state funds, which will help, seeing that we passed the budget with, close to a $700,000 loss. So that money will be used for state match. And then we also got some more funding for the O&D program. Tim has been working and Rich have been working really hard on, updating that program because the funding this year just was not nearly what we needed to continue at, the level of demand that we're seeing, really for all areas, but especially Chin County. So a big thanks to V-Trans for that.
Before you move on, Nick, I do just want to let everybody know how much I appreciate your staff, Rich and Tim, responding to the O&D crisis, and that I thought that Tim did an outstanding job yesterday with the O&D partners, and I think that we've done, considering the circumstances, just really proud of the work that you all have done.
Couldn't agree more. So thank you for both for dealing with that. And we're hoping that, we'll be able to, with some adjustments in terms of what trips are allowed, that we'll be able to get across the finish line for 26 without, substantial reductions in service for folks for that program. That's really all the departmental updates. My plan is I'm hoping to do another FY26 operating budget adjustment because the original one that I had you folks approve didn't really reflect the rural transfer. Now that we know that St. Albans is leaving in January, I think that's material enough, and there's been some other changes as well. But the adjustment would primarily just be to update what's going on the rural. Well, no, there's some effects on the urban side as well. But so my hope is once the audit is done, that I'll probably be looking to bring that in like March or sometime around that time frame, just to update the operating budget, so we can get a more accurate picture of what we're looking at, given the updated funding and obviously the things that are going on with the rural transfer. In terms of financials, they were attached to my financial report. They're as of October. There's obviously the budget to actual, which is really our income statement, and then we provided a balance sheet as well. As we presented last month, and we had a fairly significant loss on the rural side. I'm happy to report, as I stated last month, that loss for the most part has gone away because we were able to do our O&D billings. So as a whole, the authority, both urban and rural, had a total operating deficit of less than $10,000. Which is great, and a negative change in net assets of 1.3 million. Really, that's just a result of us not doing enough CapEx. So depreciation was higher than capital investment. So that is what's driving the negative change in net assets. Now, the hope is that'll reverse over the course of the year as we get vehicle deliveries and we do capital projects. How that splits out is about an $8,700 operating deficit on the urban side and close to $950,000 negative change in net assets as well. And then on the rural side, $794. So we went from over 200,000 down to 794. So I'm pretty happy with that. And just some future guidance, with the additional 200,000 that V-Trans provided. My hope is that we won't lose 700,000 this year. We'll lose, maybe hopefully 500,000 on the rural side. So, but we'll have to see. We're only 4 months into the fiscal year, so we got a lot of time left for the budget. So just looking at just some variances, there really wasn't a ton. In terms of revenues, the benchmark is 33.3%. That's how much through the fiscal year we are. That's where we'd like to see our revenues and our expenses at. The urban side was at 32% and the rural was at 35%. The reason for that on the rural side is just the investment income's higher. So that's not a bad thing. That's actually a good thing. On the expense side, same thing. Both urban and rural were at 32%. We'd like to see them below the benchmark, especially on the rural side, just because of the impact of seasonal service. The driver wages did what we hoped they would do. So we've got a bigger spread from the benchmark for driver wages. And so, I'm really happy with where we're at, especially with the additional funding that's coming in from V-Trans, because, one of the areas where we were most concerned was just in the budget, is just in really having to do with those lines that Chittenden and O&D are attached to, as well as the others. So I don't really have a whole lot of concerns at this point. You know, the budget looks good in terms of where we're at, but like I said, we'll continue to monitor it. We've been working hard, or I should say Rich has been working hard at developing a cash flow statement as well. So those are the three statements you'd expect to see when you look at financials, which is, you want an income statement, a balance sheet, and a cash flow statement. We've never really been able to do the cash flow statement just because we had a number of balance sheet items that weren't updated on a regular basis, so it made it difficult. But we've made some improvements there, and we think we can bring you at least a pretty good pro forma cash flow statement on a monthly basis pretty soon, which I think will be really good. So so some good news there. But happy to answer any questions. That's really all I have on the finance report, at least.
Questions for Nick? It sounds reasonable, and it sounds though as when we do the transfer, might be some small impact on the fund balance, but probably not too significant.
So I'm glad you brought that up, Paul. Actually, I'm thanks for reminding me. So one thing I did want to bring up is we are going to be making the first half of what we would expect RCT to be getting for their fund. I don't like to say fund balance because, as I wrote in my report, we don't really operate with a fund balance in terms of the type of accounting that we do here. It's really a net position situation or a net asset. And the problem always has been is that, when you look at your unrestricted net position, it doesn't necessarily mean all of that's in cash. It's really just equity. It's the total of assets minus liabilities, and not all your assets are cash. Or even cash that you've got right now. That's why if you look in the audit in the back section, when I got here, I created a management kind of imposed designation that it's my estimate, or I think it's a better measure when you're looking at our balance sheet at what are our liquid, net assets, not just our net assets. So you'll see that, when the audit is presented, but we'll be using that measure as our quote unquote fund balance. And we'll be providing RCT because they are taking over the service in January, the first half of that. And that kind of protects us and them and TBT from us giving them too much money, and then we end up having higher losses, and there's not as much fund balance at the end of the year. So we're moving forward with that, and that's kind of another reason I want to do another operating budget adjustment, because that's not reflected in there as well. So
Thank you, Nick, for that.
yeah.
Any other questions for Nick? All right, let's move on to another challenge.
All right.
FY27 operating budget.
Okay, let's see here. Share my screen here. Where's it? Okay, I'm hopeful you can all see this now. Please let me know if you can't.
Got it.
Okay, great. So I've got a lot of slides here, so if I go too quick, but I think we're doing pretty well with time, so I think we'll be fine. But please stop me, if I go too fast. I'm happy to pause. So we're looking at the 27 operating budget. As you've come to see with my typical PowerPoints for this, I like to give you a couple things to think about as we go through it. So this is a urban only budget. So it fully reflects our expected impact of the rural transfer and kind of the operating, the leveraging that we're experiencing as a result of that. For the most part, it's a largely level funded VTrans support. Couple caveats there, but for the most part, that's what we're planning on is largely level funded. Um, it's got current service levels planned. So whatever we have and whatever we're operating right now is what we expect to be operating in 27. And then about an average 6% assessment increase. That's not, perfect for everyone, but that's about what people experienced this fiscal year between all of the assessments. And then really the operating result that you're going to see is driven by the rural transfer. As I mentioned to the board, it's, the rural transfer is going to be great because it's going to allow us to just focus on urban, and I think it's a good thing, but there's a cost to that, and you're going to see it. And then we do have an operating deficit that we have to deal with for FY27, and I know that's a little frustrating because a month ago or so, I think we were up in front of you saying, 27 isn't going to be as bad as we thought. And, but again, that was my budget or my projection before the rural transfer. And now that, we know this is definitely going to happen, this is the reality that we're going to be facing shortly. So looking at the consolidated budget, and I won't spend a ton of time here.
Hey, Nick, if I could have a second, and again, I'm sorry that it took me a while to realize I was muted.
Please go ahead.
I want to take some responsibility for the positivity about FY27. I can acknowledge that Nick all along was asking me to be conservative in the I don't want to say exuberance, but I'm happy that we don't have to go into FY27 with reductions before we start, like we originally thought. But I just want to make sure that Nick is credited for being cautious.
Well, I don't know if I fully agree with you there. I probably should have just done the urban only budget from the beginning and not given you the numbers with it spread out. So I take equal responsibility for that and understand how that can be kind of frustrating from the board to be told one thing and then we're seeing this now. So but anyways,
Nick, at some point in the presentation, could you talk about how where we are landing compares to where we thought we were going to be landing with Steve Faubles? The first report.
So I don't know what quite we mean with what Steve was. Oh, you mean in terms of what they thought the rural transfer was,
Yeah.
what he thought the transfer was going to go. Well, so the problem with Steve's is he didn't do it focused on what it was going to cost us. He did it basically what it was going to save the program as a whole, in terms of like, would the rural operators be able to, do it without having to incur, larger costs to themselves or be able to save money.
I know,
he didn't.
I thought there were projections of significant savings for the program as a whole. So those savings, are they being realized and who's receiving those savings? I'm just curious how that all.
Sure. And I know Dan's here too. He can speak to that, but I'll just say the savings have not been realized because the transfer hasn't gone through yet. So really it's just a projection from Steve's part of what he thinks, they're going to be able to do. I think it's very much up in the air whether this thing is going to be cost neutral. But I always tend to err on the kind of cup half empty kind of thing. But I hope they save a lot of money, and I think the hope from VTrans was if they did do that, they would be able to provide us some additional support in the future. But I don't want to speak for Dan. So Dan, if you want to jump in here, feel free. Is Dan on still?
Yeah, I am. I'm here, Nick. Yeah, thanks. I'm happy to do that. And so your statements are absolutely correct, right? We've yet to see what the final outcome of the rural transfer is on the budgets and whether it really will be, a cost benefit for the rural side, a cost neutral or a cost negative. And so those numbers are still, they'll be realized probably sometime in August of 2026. We will know something once RCT transfers in January what that looks like for operating costs. And so unfortunately, it's still, to be determined. But Nick is also right. If we do see, a lot of savings on the rural side, the plan from VTrans is to make sure that those funds are distributed across the state, including to GMT Urban through their grant. And so whether that's in CMAC or another 5311, flex over to you. We don't know that scenario yet. That would be determined. And we're also looking forward to the grant applications and what the requests come in, because that will actually help us to determine on a very preliminary basis what the ask is compared to what we're getting from the FTA, as well as from the state, as well as from the transfer that we do from Federal Highway. And so a lot of moving pieces, unfortunately, still.
Thanks, Dan. So if there's no, did that answer your question, Susan?
Kind of. Thanks.
Okay. Well, we can follow up after if we need to. But looking at just on a consolidated basis, and like I said, we'll jump in, to each one of the areas. Really, we have a pretty substantial jump in revenues for the year. So a 7%, increase. Most of that is in Fed, state, and local. There's an 8% increase there. We're really able to jump up that Fed, state, local because we're using basically every dollar of federal reserves that we have. So this is really kind of the final year of having, those additional funds available to us. And that's what makes, FY28 so much harder because, we were left, this is really a one-time benefit. We're getting some additional funds from VTrans too, or that's at least what we're budgeting. We're budgeting a continuation of some additional federal support in terms of carbon reduction funds and state support, which helps. But we got that in 26 as well, so that's not really accounting for the growth. But 7% growth in revenues. But the problem is we've got a 10% increase in expenses. And that's really what's driving, the negative bottom line. And you'll notice, the big jumps is really where you'd expect them to be, salary and wages, benefits. There's some general and admin as well for some lines like, insurance and computer services and things like that. I will be honest, my hope is like as we get closer to the rural transfer and we start looking at some contracts, hopefully we can renegotiate them, but some contracts don't really care how big you are. The cost is the cost. And so, we'll see how that turns out. But really, the big driver is people, and the loss of, allocating costs to the rural side.
If I could ask a question here.
Sure.
You stated that there are two FTEs transferring from rural to urban. Could you tell us who those people are?
Yeah, so John Moore. So originally he was fully allocated to the rural side because that's what he was working on, primarily the Medicaid program and helping out in St. Albans. So he's coming back to the urban side, actually in February. However, I need to get briefed by Clayton on that. But and then Tammy Brady, who is a longtime call center employee, who is going to be helping out with some of the ADA work that we have. So those are the two employees.
Thank you.
Yeah, you bet. So moving on, let's see here. If I can get this thing to move on. We'll jump down to federal, state, and local funding. So this is, 90% essentially of our funding, or 89, I should say. About a 23% local match budgeted. As I had mentioned in the previous slide, we put every dollar of federal funds that we have at our capacity into this budget. And then 2.2 million of state operating and 700,000 of carbon reduction funds budgeted. I point that out not because that's an increase from last year. That's what we got from VTrans in 26, but mostly because, you know, originally I didn't have those funds in the budget. But VTrans has, you know, kind of assured me that they're highly confident we're going to get another year of those funds. So I put them in the budget. And so I just want to, you know, if that turns out to be not true, that number, you know, goes from 800,000 to almost double that. So that's just something to note. And then the state funds, you know, I think hopefully, you know, my only concern is the state isn't exactly flush with federal dollars, or I'm sorry, state funds either at this point. There's a lot of, I think, agencies and departments showing up with their hands out, and hopefully will be prioritized if economic conditions get bad.
Nick, can I just stop for a second? Chapin, you have a question?
Yeah.
Just want to clarify that I understand it correctly, that the carbon reduction funds only continue through FY27 and the program itself is not funded beyond that. So we could assume that this is one-time money. Is that correct?
That's absolutely correct. Yeah. So, you know, who knows? Maybe VTrans comes up with it again in 28, but they have told me not to plan for that. So yeah, that's another, you know, reason, Chapin, among just using all of our own reserves, you know, the roll off of both of those things in 28 make 28. It's why you're going to see such an uptick in the deficit in 28 based off of level funding. And I'm going to be working on bringing a updated 28, you know, forecast to you folks in the next couple, you know, hopefully in a month or so, just so we can understand what that hill looks like as well. This is one of my favorite charts. You're probably sick of seeing it, but I thought I would include it again just to keep track. You know, I think it's just a good reflection of, you know, what happened. So this is just a line chart that shows our federal, state, and local funding over the years. And you'll see back in the years when, you know, I don't know if we were financially perfect, but, you know, we didn't have the issues we're having right now. But typically federal funding was about, you know, 50%, a little under, a little over sometimes. And we were able to make, you know, things work. As you see after the pandemic, you know, it really got extreme. So at one point it was 3/4 of our funding, but we're still not really heading in the right direction. And we're going to be forced to head in the right direction next, or in FY28 and a little bit in 27, because that orange bar is going to have to come down, and one of the others is going to have to come up, or we're going to have some, you know, significant cost reductions, just to continue where we are. Sorry, Lona, do you have a question?
Sorry, is this just urban or is it urban and rural?
This is just urban.
Okay, thank you.
Sorry, I should have probably put that in our title. But yeah, so you can see pretty large uptick as we entered the pandemic, and that, you know, was really just because the federal government gave us so much money. But, you know, guess what? When you print a lot of money, it tends to make it worth less and prices go up. And so I don't know if that was ultimately the best path forward, but it's what they did. So looking at the federal grants mix, this just kind of shows you the breakout of what the Fed, state, and local is. As you can see, most, a little over half is 5307. About 1.4 of that 6.2 is really our reserves. Our regular apportionment, and you'll see this in the next slide or two, is really in the 4.2 or $4.4 million range. That's with carving off some money for PM. But but yeah, about half of our funding this year is 5307 in the Fed state local. Then you've got some carbon reduction funds coming in. Planning, I just want to point out there's not all of that money is really ours that we're spending. Some of that is a pass through to CCRBC. PM stands for preventive maintenance, and that actually includes $200,000 of 5307 funds that we turn into preventive maintenance just to get the better local match. And then CMAQ, that comes along with the carbon reduction and the majority of the PM. That comes directly from VTrans. So each year VTrans kindly flexes over a good chunk, millions of dollars of highway funds to help support our maintenance and just regular operating costs. So appreciate
Nick, on
it.
the CMAQ funds, I'm trying to recall, it seems though, as we've added some routes, we had some short-term CMAQ and we had some that was lifetime CMAQ. So I'm just interested to see that that some's gonna end in FY 27.
So I don't see any ending, Paul. I think during the pandemic, they made all CMAQ forever. So I don't believe we have any routes right now that are at risk of losing the CMAQ funding. If anything, we're kind of hoping that we might be able to do some changes of current routes and be able to grow that just because we do have a little bit of CMAQ reserves. That's a one-time benefit, but it could help us a little bit. So we'll be looking at that, and obviously you get the nice only 20% local match that you need to operate that service. So this is the outlook of, as you saw in that previous picture, 5307 funds, they make up such a large percentage of our operating, budget in terms of our revenues. And you can see, through the years 24, 25, 26, 27, we were spending COVID relief funds. So we were kind of able to save our annual apportionment that was coming in from just our regular 5307 funds. But what you'll see is in 28, because I'm planning to spend all of the COVID relief funds in FY 26, that FY 27, we're really going to be back to just our regular apportionment, which is in, the $4.3 million range, right? And so that's what's making 28 really hard, because we've kind of used up all of our one-time, reserve balances. But my hope is maybe I'm pretty conservative budgeter. I'm hoping 26. Maybe we end the year underspending a little bit, like we did in FY 25, and maybe that helps 27 out a little bit, helps close some of the gap here. State and local assessments, this is a breakout by member. I did break out Essex Junction, Essex Town this time, so happy that is provided. And then, as I mentioned, and we'll go through kind of a little bit more in this, but average assessment increases were about 6% for all the assessments, excluding the special assessment last year that didn't pass. And the total assessments equal about $4.3 million. We did true up the fixed route assessments to reflect kind of the current levels of service that we have right now. So that's good. We're happy that was completed. The ADA assessments were complicated this year because of the fact that we didn't go through the typical or the regular process that we really should have to before we implemented it. So we decided to credit back the change in discount that we had in FY 26 for this year, as well as we reverted back to the 50% discount. So you might remember in 26, we went from a 50 to a 55, went from 50% discount down to 45% discount. But we really shouldn't have done that until we got approval from all the communities. Now Clayton's going out getting approval this year. We're back to how ADA assessments have always been. We're giving the money back from last year that, because of the discount we shouldn't have implemented. And once the policy is updated, then I think, hopefully the board can make a decision on what that discount should be for fiscal year 28 and on. Because I do think that that is one of the areas that, that's one of the reasons we're in, the situation we're in is just because, ADA funding is just not sufficient. And then just looking at state funds, as I mentioned, we get about 2.2, but there are some other state funds that we get small amount for other grants like capital and building management.
Nick, if I could just interject to let the board members know that Winooski has already taken up the ADA question and voted to pass it. So we have 7 more communities to take the vote.
Great. So as I mentioned, there was an impact on ADA. We saw, I think it was like $130,000 drop in ADA because of having to give the credit back and then going back to the 50% discount. So what happened was, to offset that decline in revenue, fixed route assessments increased by a pretty large amount this year, 19.5, but net, it evened itself out. So we just had a higher increase on fixed route assessments, and that offset, the loss in revenue for ADA. So I understand that can be a little confusing, but just know that it's about 6%, for all members, which is, when you look at your total assessment, it changes year over year, and that's roughly kind of what we've seen over the years. So it's not really out of character for what has been experienced. The College Street Shuttle did go down by about 38%, and that was that assessment, but that's really just due to the end of fare free for that service. Now, the good news is that I did update kind of fare revenue assumptions, so hopefully some of that money that was lost will be made up in increased fares. However, it's a loss of local funds, so that's the only downside, because fares do not count as local dollars. And then South Burlington has a special O&D assessment. We just increased that from about $2,600 to $5,000, just to make sure it matches the actual local match need for that route. Okay, let's see. So jumping down to operating revenues. So operating revenues are, about, I think, 11% of, our total revenues. There's not a, substantial, as much of a change here as you saw up in the Fed, state, local side. So just kind of going through a couple of the changes year over year. Passenger revenue went up by about $70,000 or 4%. That's really a combination of just changes in the unlimited access contracts that we have. So there's escalators each year in that agreement we have with CATMA. But also, I did add a little bit of revenue in there for the College Street Shuttle to capture that fare increase. There's a little bit of change in paratransit fare revenues as well, just because of the change in the College Street Shuttle as well. So that is not only fare free to fixed route rider, or was fare free for fixed route riders, it was fare free for ADA riders. And so I captured that increased revenue as well. And then we did see a little bit of a decrease both in miscellaneous revenue, which is just me being more conservative. The $5,000 was a little high in my opinion that we approved in 26, so I brought that down. And then the miscellaneous purchase of service, that was really just a loss of a contribution that we got from St. Michael's College that they no longer were able to make. So
and Nick, I want to just interject and share my appreciation for Chapin's facilitation of the new unlimited access agreement with the hospital. And so that's a $60,000 unlimited access agreement that is super helpful for us. So thank you very much, Chapin.
Pleasure.
Okay. So just some reflection on historical fare revenue. This is one of my other favorite charts, just kind of showing, so it's also why back in the previous years, FY12 to, FY18 or 17, things weren't as difficult because fairs covered such a large percentage of our total budget. At one point, they were 22%. I mean, I would kill for that right now. But now it's down, to 9-10%. And really, it's not because we're collecting less fares. As you see, we're pretty much, because fares is the orange bar or line at the bottom. We're pretty much back to kind of what we've always collected in the past, maybe a little bit less. But the problem is the blue bar, which is our operating expenses, have gone up. That's only a line I want to see in a stock chart, not really in my operating expenses. So that's really the problem is it's the growth in the expenses, and the lack of growth in fares. Hi, Alona. Do you have a question, Alona?
Yeah, thank you. Are the fares represented here as gross, or are they adjusted for changes in fare fees, like the fare costs per rider?
These are just gross total amount of dollars that were recognized as fare revenue. So they're not net of any, to be honest with you, back then we didn't really have, folks didn't really pay with a lot of credit card it was a lot of it was cash based. We didn't have the fare technology we have now.
Yeah.
Now there's we definitely pay some transaction costs for fares now because of the new technology.
Right, but it used to be $1.10. Like FY13, and now it's $2.
Yeah.
And I'm also wondering, I know there's a big emphasis on choice riders at some point, and so I'm just curious how that might have.
This has not been updated to reflect, changes in fares. It's just simply how much fare revenue did we collect? So, I would say that likely I would have to look at. A big one was the link. We used to charge $4 each way for the link, and now we don't have that anymore. We have fare capping. I don't know how much discounted fares plays into it. Maybe there's a larger need for discounted fares than there was back then. So maybe ridership is a little bit lower. Go ahead, Chapin.
Fine, thank you. I was going to mention the link context. I think we have a more equitable fare structure than we did previously. The fact we're getting about the same amount of gross revenue with a more equitable structure and without links performing as they did historically is quite remarkable. And I would just add a little context to the mostly cash transactions, which you're right, about 10 years ago. But the cost in staff time counting that was a significant cost. I remember hearing that, a day a week, there'd be, all hands on deck admin staff sitting counting, quarters and pennies.
Yeah, there's definitely an opportunity cost that we gain back from not having to do all of that. We do it every other week now, and it takes us, how long does it take?
Couple hours.
But we have a lot less people doing it, I think, than we did back then. We're not having to pull in so many people. So, but I do the coins every other week, and it's fun. So it's a favorite part of my job.
Could I ask Alona? Could I ask her to restate what she was saying about her comment about choice riders?
I just I think it's great to look at fares, and I think it's an area that could be dug into more just to understand, as we look at ridership and fares, and to understand, what has changed between 2012 and 2027 and what we're actually realizing and what our opportunity to realize is. So
great. Thank you.
Yeah, if that makes sense.
Great. Yes, makes total sense. And I agree with that.
And I also wonder, regionally, how many people do we have spending that much time counting coins, and do we need a centralized coin counter? But that's a different discussion.
Yeah. We have just a coin machine in my office that I pour the coins into, and it puts them into some bags. you know, I would personally, I wouldn't outsource it just because it's going to cost us more money. You got to pay me to do what I'm doing anyway. So like, you know, why? I mean, there's better things I could be doing with my time than that, I'm sure. And my hope is to allocate that, just or delegate that to someone. I mean, Rich definitely helps out doing it too, when I'm not around. But he does helps with the bills. Tim helps. You know, it's a team effort, and I think we try to get it done as quick as possible and as efficiently as possible. Is it the best use of some of our staff's time? No, obviously not. But you know, I want to be a team player, and just because I'm a director, I don't think that should prevent me from helping out on things like that. So operating expenses, jumping down to those well, our largest expense rate lines, salaries and benefits. This is again where really you see the cost of the rural transfer, and you don't see it obviously in the driver, the mechanics, because you know those are the folks. All the drivers on the rural side are rural drivers, and they're going to, you know, another organization to do that. You know, the same thing with the mechanics. If you're a rural mechanic, you're going to TVT. The problem where this comes in is in the admin staff, we often have folks that, you know, even though you're in Burlington working for GMT Urban, you do rural activities, and so we allocate some of your salary to rural, you know, funds or rural grants. And now we're having a situation where the rural side is going away. We're losing access to that funding, and the urban side is now having to pick up the full cost of those salary and benefits. On top of that, like I said, we are having some headcount increases by 2 FTEs, so that's definitely an impact as well. But you know, one of the largest is really just the loss of that cost allocation.
Go ahead,
Susan?
Susan.
Yeah, I still have a question about the FTEs. So if they were originally paid for under the rural budget, like what are how are their responsibilities changing? Like were they doing work that was, yeah, if you
So,
could explain that.
well, I can explain. I think John's role is I'll let Clayton kind of cover that. I know for Tammy's role, she's kind of already kind of doing what she's been doing. I mean, she's helping out in the call center, which is really a rural kind of that's really rural work for the Medicaid and O&D program and whatnot. But she's also currently doing some ADA work right now as well. And the problem is those other, you know, all the rural work is going to be going away, and she's going to focus primarily on ADA after the rural transfer. Which, to be honest with you, you know, we do need some help in that area. I think there's a lot of improvements that could be made for the ADA program in terms of just how we do applications. We outsource the application process right now. I think we could bring that into the company and save some money. Dealing with all the applications is a significant amount of work. The tracking, answering questions from folks who call in. I mean, a lot of times these folks are not people who know how to navigate the system, and they need a lot of, you know, hand holding to get them through the process. So there's a number of areas in ADA where I do think we need some help.
Lorna?
And Susan, as far as the question with John, is that prior to his work in the rural areas, he was in charge of urban operations. And so so he had a urban focused job because of the corrective action plan for the Medicaid program and the rural transfer. He was, you know, assigned to work on those two for this year. He was previously part of the urban budgets for previous fiscal years.
Lorna, you have a question?
Thank you.
Thanks. I think this is really helpful. I'm a little confused about a few things. One of them is the 2 FTEs you mentioned. Are those the only salary staffing cost shifts that are going from rural to urban? And then, you know, as we talk about these costs being absorbed, you know, I think initially we were talking about it as whether or not it would be supported by VTrans. But I think for us and for the community, it would be really helpful to say, okay, these are the cost increases that are occurring between 26 and 27. And this is what moving these positions to, and we keep saying it's good for urban, but what is that additional staff capacity going to improve on the urban side? So like understanding how things will look better in 27 because of this increase in staffing in urban would be super helpful at some point. Thank you.
Yeah, so I'll cover I'll attempt to answer what I think you're asking. So we have two folks that are 100% rural funded right now, and they're coming over in 27 or possibly in 26, a little bit earlier, to the urban budget. So that's 100% transfer of their benefits and wages from rural to urban. We also have some folks like me, for an example. I put 10% of my salary and benefits go to a rural grant. It's called the Rural Mobility Management Grant. So that 10%, which before the rural transfer was absorbed by the rural side, is now going away. So that's also an impact. That's not 100%, but a percentage of my salary and benefits. And I'm just one example. We have numerous numbers of admin staff that split their time between urban and rural. And when rural goes away, we can't pay them 40 or 50% less. We have to, transfer all of those costs to the urban side. So hopefully that's helps answer those questions.
Kevin?
Yeah, great. This is a really important conversation. I'm glad we're all getting into the weeds and understanding the detail here. What I would love to understand is that the proposed staffing level that we're seeking to create for our overhead, our admin team, is one, going to give urban more attention in the future to be able to be more forward thinking of an organization, and two, that level of investment is in line with other similar sized urban transit providers. I want to be able to say to VTrans, and Dan, I hope you're still on the call, is that we are trying to get back to a normal level of admin funding to keep this transit authority vital. And, we originally took on the rural properties in order to help VTrans and the rest of the state as rural transit entities were collapsing. And we did that, and we served well, and we had positive audits, and we've done that work. Now I think it is fair that we land reasonably on our feet. And if this level of admin overhead is what we need to be successful, then I think, the argument is this is what we had prior, and we deserve to have that after the rural transfer. Could you help me with some of that context?
And if I could add to that, Chapin, one of the things that I'll go back to is that the 2023 organizational assessment, what that pointed out was that if we kept the same level of administrative staff after the rural transfer, then we would have the right size of staff for an urban network of our size. And so to me, that's I understand that was done in 2023 before the current fiscal crisis really came to hit. But that is a point that we can't forget. We cannot go from being a large organization that was understaffed to a smaller organization that was understaffed. That would completely defeat the whole purpose of the rural transfer.
If I could just add one thing, I just really want to emphasize what Alona was saying about understanding what our added capacity is, what we're able to do now that we haven't been able to do. Having something that explains this, I think will be very helpful for board members as they're talking about this in their communities. So, thank you.
Great. So I'll move on unless there's some other questions. Obviously, this is the biggest part of the budget, so please, interrupt me if you want to continue or need more details. Salary and benefits transit's a very people-driven business, so this is where most of our expenses are. So not a lot of change in the driver and mechanic. I mean, there is some change, but it's not as extreme as the other wages. Really, the driver and mechanic cost increases are driven by the CBA, and so those cost increases are what we forecast based off of the updated contracts we have with those both those work groups. Payroll taxes, that really is, follows wages, so I won't go too much into that. Medical insurance, I kind of covered that as some of the increases due to the rural transfer because we allocate, salary and benefits as well. So some of that cost impact is the rural transfer, those benefits having to be pushed back over to the urban side. There are also the 2 FTEs that I mentioned, but there are a number of other things as well. So we are forecasting an 8% premium increase. We're hoping we're not going to see that, but that's what our recent contract that we have, I think, with the drivers mandated that we won't see over 8% healthcare premium growth over the next over the contract period that we agreed to. So that's really great because I've heard some folks experiencing double-digit premium increases. And then also there's a proposed end of admin cost share as well. So the admin staff currently pay 7.5% of premiums right now, and that has been determined to be not equitable because the union folks don't pay anything. So we are reverting back to the admin staff getting essentially the same deal as the union for the next at least I think for this budget here. Jumping down to retirement, that's another area that really follows wages, but there are some special bonuses that were per the recent contracts with the mechanics and the drivers that are driving up that cost as well. So there was a mechanic extra contribution and a driver extra contribution. I'm sorry, I'm just searching for my numbers here. And those bonuses were estimated at about $63,000. So those are helping or adding to, or really a large portion of the retirement contribution increase that you're seeing. And really, that's all I have for that area. I mean, employee development, you saw a decent increase. Really, that's a reflection of the loss of we get RTAP training funds on the rural side, and that funded a good amount of training for folks. And now that the rural side's going away, we're really losing access to those training to that training grant. So we increased, obviously we need to do training, so we had to increase the urban side by a decent amount. Dan, I looked at my cost allocation plan from a long time ago and I saw a column for urban RTAP. So I don't know if that meant that you guys gave us RTAP funds in the past, but if you're able to do it, we would sure appreciate it. So I'll throw that out there. And really that's all I have for
Thanks, Nick, for that note. I'll have to talk with Ross about that. Thanks.
Appreciate it. So jumping over to general and admin, just kind of jumping down. A lot of these are kind of like in the salary and benefits section. They're really driven by the rural transfer. So communications, dues and subscriptions, admin supplies, computer services, consulting. These are all costs that originally were shared with the rural system. I would say computer services is really the most impactful. And I think we still have a lot of work to do there. Like we need to start reaching out to those vendors and asking them, if there is a contract update that can be made to the pricing that we were currently receiving, hoping that, we're now a smaller organization, hopefully we would qualify for some sort of discount. But that, really what you're seeing here is my best estimate of what, I think those costs are going to be. But a number of other ones as well, dues and subscriptions. We have subscriptions and dues that we're going to make, and we used to split it with the rural side. We're still going to need to be members of those organizations, and we're not going to be able to share that cost with the rural side anymore. So, it's a pretty straightforward one. Insurance, I would say, is probably the number I'm most uncertain about in this section. I did budget a 13% increase because that's what we've experienced over the last 2 years. But I unfortunately wasn't able to get through or get a updated estimate from our broker in time for the budget. So I think there could be some volatility in this number. My hope is that, the large premium increase that I have budgeted or forecasted here will really cover, any volatility caused by the rural transfer. But we'll just have to see, and we'll certainly be updating that number when we do the budget adjustment and I have the renewal done. The audit figure, I will point out, is likely $5,000 higher than it should be. I got our audit back recently. I thought there was going to be a finding in there that was going to require another single audit. It turns out that there wasn't. So I expect that figure actually to go down by $5,000. And then consulting fees is really just driven by, we hired a lobbyist, and now, we split the cost of that lobbyist between urban and rural. Rural's going away, so we're gonna have to pay the full boat on that. But maybe we're able to negotiate an updated price with them. I'm not sure, so we'll have to look into that. What's my time here? Okay, I'm already over, so I'm gonna really try to get through this quickly. There's not a significant amount of change here. Driver uniforms is really the only one, and that's just to be able to purchase some higher quality product for the drivers. CCRPC does include $250,000 of pass through from the raise awards. So I just want to point out that out of that 524, 250 is really passed through to another organization. Jumping down to the vehicle building and maintenance expense, we just did the 26 budget adjustment, and so we forecasted out all the numbers, and so that work has kind of already been done recently. So all we did here was add an inflation factor to it of 2% just to maintain the purchasing power. We really focus on this area when we get closer to the budget adjustment, because then we have the most recent fiscal year's actuals, and that really kind of drives our budgeting in the maintenance line. This also can be really unpredictable because it's highly dependent on how much capital funding we get from VTrans in terms of spare parts or engines and transmissions or facility PM. So if we get a lot of that funding from VTrans, it takes pressure off of the operating budget. So we really look to update this in the budget adjustment once we have the state grant award, and that tells us really how much funding we're going to need in this area. Jumping down to contracted marketing and other. Not a ton of change in other, except for a drop in the capital match fund. Marketing is going. There's a $66,000 increase there. There's some wanting to do some increased marketing campaigns, and so that money was budgeted. And then really what you're seeing in contracted, the majority of that increase is just an inflationary adjustment for our ADA vendor. And then the other contracted service is really, and this is where we might be able to save some money in the budget adjustment, but that's money historically that we allocated costs, or there was cost allocated from the rural to the urban, because the rural side did an urban route for us, and now we're likely, that money's being budgeted to pay TBT to do those routes after the rural transfer. I am proposing that we seriously consider doing those routes ourselves, and that way we'll only have to incur the variable costs and we won't have to pay someone's fully allocated rate. And so that's where we might be able to save $2 maybe 200,000, 250 out of that 413 that you're seeing other contracted revenue, and that could help balance, some of that $800,000 shortfall. And then I just showed this because, this is another impact. There's no cost allocations anymore. So that we originally had an admin allocation. So we're allocating $450,000 to the rural side. That's going away. That was really the cost allocate over the admin cost that we had on the urban side. We're losing some revenue in terms of some maintenance work that we used to do on rural vehicles. And then the line I was just speaking about under the contracted, the GMT operated link, that was moved up to that section that I just talked to you about. Looking at the bottom line as just a reminder, roughly an $840,000 shortfall, about a 4%. We need about a 4% increase in revenues to cover that. Possible solutions and risks, fare increases, changes, service reductions. I just talked about insourcing the Berlin link trips, increased local state support. More importantly, the risk to this budget, higher inflation. We don't know our 5307 apportionment. We could lose a stick factor, hopefully not, but that's definitely always a risk. Lower support from VTrans is always a risk. And then, there could be some cash flow issues once the rural side leaves, but we did set up a line of credit, but there would be interest costs to that. And that's the motion. I'm sorry, I went a little over, and I'm happy to answer any questions from you folks.
Questions for Nick? I just have a couple issues. One is the proportion that admin is paying of their health insurance. That seems like it's a policy issue. So I think it's maybe make sure that when we present this to the board, they understand when they approve this budget that they're approving a change in policy. The other issue, I'm just wondering if you can, since you've prepared this budget, you have a pretty good idea of what the negative impact is going to be on our finances because of the transfer. Could you put that in one number for us? I mean, I think that's going to be significant. I mean, you've gone through piece by piece, and so we've seen it individually, but could you put it together for one big number?
Yeah, I could do that, Paul.
The other last issue I want to just raise is, this is a $19 million budget, something like that, and salaries and benefits are a large proportion of that, like 13 or 14 million, I forget the number, but it's a large portion of it. So as we look at this budget and you say, well, where could we make cuts? It's difficult when you have such a large portion of a budget that's gone to one issue you can't really change. And so I'm not sure that we could make many changes. I mean, you could look at some of the contracts and some of the other issues and nickel and dime these to death, consultants and so forth. But all said and done, maybe you save $100,000, which in the scheme of things seems like a bit, but it's really not that big a portion of the budget. So seems though we are where we are. I'm not sure if the rest, well, I guess we just have Chapin left here, but I'm not sure that we can go through and cut much that makes any difference.
Well, the contracts are passed, so can't change those. Sorry, Chapin.
Yeah. We had a quorum. I think as long as we had a quorum, I think Paul and I can still have a motion here. I'm okay with recommending this. I would say that I would like a strategy session to talk through with Clayton a number of policy items. Certainly the admin staff policy change for benefits is one. Clayton, you and I have talked about operations at the DTC with breaks and ways of adjusting schedules to increase efficiency. Are there little bits here that cumulatively can bring down this 800K? Even if we can, I fully understand, and I'm glad Dan is still here. We still have a structural deficit, even if we can close 27 due to the changing federal funding landscape in 28. So somehow I think together VTrans and GMT need to walk together with a funding approach into the future, whether that's a different funding source or a different approach to kind of bring the urban system out of this vicious cycle of continued cuts.
Thanks,
So
Jason.
with that, I'd move to approve or recommend approval to the GMT Board of Commissioners, the proposed FY27 operating budget totaling $20,985,156.
I can second that, but I don't believe we have a quorum.
I don't think we have a quorum, so I'll just, when I present to the board, I'll just point out that, we lost quorum and we'll go from there, I guess. I mean, it's all I
But
think.
if we had a quorum, I think the motion would have passed.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
My understanding is that once you had a quorum, you can continue to operate after the quorum leaves, but we can convey that Paul and I were supportive of bringing this to the full board.
Any other questions for Nick? Thanks for the heavy lift. I know this is always a tough thing to put together, and with the rural transfer as part of the equation, that's an extremely heavy lift. So you and your staff have done a great job. So thank you for that.
Thanks, Paul. I'll just point out that, I do think there's a number of areas where we can close some of the gap, and I have some ideas about that. So happy to put those on, paper or be part of a meeting. We also have another shot at this in the budget adjustment. So, my main hope is I just want to get folks their assessment letters, and get those out and provided. So that's my main issue. But if there's a wish to update this, the board can certainly. That's why I'm bringing it in December. I can always bring it back in January, with changes, and we'll have it approved by the February deadline. So thank you.
Thank you, Nick. Any other issues, Chapin or any other staff visitors would like to bring up at this point? If not, we stand adjourned at 9:15. Thank you all.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks all.
Bye,
Thanks,
Shane.
everyone. Bye-bye.
Yeah, have a good day, everyone. Close this damn thing. I gotta stop sharing.